Hello and welcome to the Developing an Additional Education Needs Friendly Virtual Classroom. The title has changed in recent times due to moving more online. Normally it would just be an Additional Education Needs Friendly Classroom, but we've edited to Virtual Classroom to fit the needs of the times. My name is Daniel Hunt-Vincent. I am the Additional Educational Needs Coordinator for British Council Spain, working predominantly in Somosagras in Madrid. I am still currently a teacher, teaching children from early years to secondary English. And before I was a teacher in Spain, I was working in mainstream education within a primary school in the UK, teaching children from around 7 years old to 11 years old. So I've got a range. Within teaching in mainstream education in England, I worked a lot with children with additional educational needs and ensuring they were included in the mainstream classroom. Some of the strategies that we will look at later in the session are strategies that I used within my classroom, so I know that they've been effective and worked with some students. And other strategies I'm using at the moment while I'm teaching virtually online. Okay. Also with us, we have Sonia. If you didn't hear from Anne before, Sonia Ullman is part of the child protection team for Spain, but works heavily with additional educational needs students, all the way from, again, early years to adults. So she may be jumping in at some points to add just some extra information. Okay. What I would like you to do in the little Q&A section, the question and answer section, is what I would like you to do is write down what you would consider normal for each of these following examples. For example, if I was talking about number 2, I might put 2 in the question and answer, and then let's say glasses or 20/20 vision or perfect vision. So all these areas, what do you consider as normal? Write the number and then what you consider as normal. Okay, so I'll just give you around 1 minute, 2 minutes to just put in the Q&A, and Anne and Maureen will feed back to me what most people said. So I can see that Monica's put 1 for women's height, 1.6 meters. Brilliant, okay. See if you can think about the other ones. What would we consider as normal?
Just because participants might have come in a bit later, the question and answer section is down at the bottom, preguntas y respuestas, so that's acting as our chat for this webinar. You can just post it into there.
So we're getting lots of 1.6. Yep, post the answer in there. Start having a think about number 2, 3, and maybe number 4. I'll give you about 30 more seconds just to write as many different answers as you can think of. Okay, what was great from actually looking in the Q&A of what people were actually putting is I saw someone called Sonia in there actually post, I would never say the word normal. And I completely agree with this. This is what we're actually getting onto in the next part. So with women's height, what we talk about when we talk about normality is average or typical. And this is with respect to statistical frequency. So we could be talking about the average across Spain or the average across the world or the average in China, etc. When we talk about eyesight, what is normally classed as normal is a lack of disability. So what is the ideal, or what is the perfect state of functioning? Again, I'll come back to all these things regarding additional educational needs soon. When we're talking about waiting for a bus, we're normally talking about conformity to social and cultural expectations of what is described as the norm for people. And when we talk about, say, consumption of alcohol, we're talking about making sure an individual well-being, or they're not actually suffering any personal distress. So overconsumption of alcohol may be having an issue on somebody's well-being. Now, as Sonia said in the actual chat there, we need to get rid of this understanding of what normality is, especially in the classroom, and especially when we're talking about students with additional educational needs. If we're talking about the first, what is average or typical, a lot of the time when we look at students' progress within the classroom, we look at what their average progress is within maths, or within language, or within English, and if they're reaching the needs of the rest of their class. But sometimes with a student with additional educational needs, this is impossible, and we shouldn't be looking at the statistical frequency of this student. We should just be looking at what progress they've made, what development they've made within class, whether that be something small, whether that be a social development, emotional development, rather than just looking at what the average is for a child's or a student's test results. When we talk about here lack of disability, there's a prominence put on the word disability sometimes. If we think about a student who has dyslexia, there's often the focus on that they struggle with their reading, or they struggle with their writing. Often we need to actually have a look at what their ability is. It's statistically proven that students with dyslexia are often more creative thinking than other students. So we need to actually start looking at within the classroom, what can they bring to the classroom, rather than what do I need to put in place to make sure they can fit in the classroom? What strengths do they have in the classroom? This conformity to social and cultural expectation kind of fits in with the next one as well, individual well-being and lack of personal distress. Often if we think of emotional and social normalities, we think of children having lots of friends, or we think of children following instructions in class and putting their hand up, etc. But with a student who's autistic, on the autism spectrum disorder, or suffers from Asperger's syndrome, they often may not form to the social or cultural expectations and norms that's expected of them. Again, we shouldn't be using the word normal, because this is fine. If they don't feel like they need a friend in class, and they feel like they can still be self-sufficient in class and make progress, and they're still happy within class, then even though for us it might cause us personal distress that they're not relating and they're not socializing with people in class, but for them we've got to realize, is it causing them personal distress? So as Sonia said earlier within the chat, we've got to kind of move away from having this in our head, this normality, because we need to look at all the students as being individuals, whether they have an additional educational need, have a special educational need, or don't have a special educational need. Okay. Now, this is something that I know that when we talk about school policies and head teacher expectations of their teachers, this is something that comes into account a lot. So teachers are responsible and accountable for the progress and development of the pupils in their class, including where pupils access support from teaching assistants, specialist staff, or additional resources. Now, most teachers, we do have a responsibility for the progress and development. And this is a goal for most teachers, to put those resources and those aspects in place to help the children. However, when we actually come to teaching the class, often the class looks like this. And I know this is a very British, it's from a British book, but it's very relatable, these things. So within our class looks more like this. We have a Mr. Quiet. We have quiet children within the class. We have mischievous children within the class. We have sometimes silly children within the class, good children in the class, children that just want to finish everything as fast as we can. And it is our responsibility to try and put those support and those resources in place. But often what suits Mr. Quiet may not suit Mr. Noisy. And this is becoming extra more more prominent when we're actually teaching online, that it's more difficult now to actually get a one method fits all strategy to teaching. We need to start to think about how we can personalize the learning for each of these students. It's not always possible to personalize everything individually, but this is when this quote on the next slide comes up. We kind of have an expectation for all schools meeting the needs of all their pupils. But when our classroom looks like this, that's often near enough impossible for us. So for me, it's good to have this goal, it's good to have this objective. But for me, it's more schools meeting the needs of more of their children, okay? Now, as I can see, because we have quite a few participants here, each of you are on this path that you want to help these students with additional educational needs, and you want to help your students in class. So we are getting to this, but we are on this path of meeting the needs of more of our pupils. Having this as all schools and all children, sometimes it's an impossible target, and it's an impossible expectation to put on yourself, which adds a lot of pressure. But if this is your goal, to meet more of the needs of the children, that's a more realistic target, and that's more of what we're actually after and what you're clearly doing now by attending this session. Okay, so here I have a little grid, and I like to do this with the staff at British Council as well, but it's definitely relevant it's even more relevant for mainstream teaching. What I would like you to do in the Q&A again is think about what qualities and what features do you think are important for a teacher to have in order to include additional educational needs children in their class. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes again in the question and answer section, just to write down what qualities and what features you think a good teacher who can include additional educational needs children in their class should have. Okay, so if you just start typing some of them qualities in the chat. Sorry, in the question and answer. So if you can just post in the chat. So for example, Rotheo's put energetic, hopeful, fair, calm, skillful. These are really good qualities to have. If you could just post in the chat what qualities you think make a good additional educational needs teacher. Flexible, sympathetic, brilliant, patient, caring, empathetic. I'll give you just 30 more seconds just to write some of them in. You can, if you want to type 1 in, that's fine. If you want to type 2 or 3 in, that's brilliant. Okay, while you're typing them in, I'm just going to show you what qualities I've put for myself. Now, sorry, just going back to this, this is a really good activity to do with different members of your staff, just to get them to start to think about what it is to be a good teacher of children who have additional educational needs. So for me, and I saw this also in the chat, when you start a jigsaw, you always start with the corners. And for me, when I'm thinking about what features and what personality traits I need, I'm starting with the corners. So for me, one of the most important things is high expectations of the pupils. And I saw this also in the chat. Just because if I look at my list and I see that, I know that I have a child who's got dyslexia in my class, I need to make sure that I'm not focusing on, okay, they're going to struggle with their reading or their writing. I need to start thinking, what can they do? What is going to be their strength in class? How am I going to make them more confident when it comes to their reading and writing? I'm not just thinking, oh no, they're not going to be doing any of the writing tasks. I need to think, what can I put in place in order to get the best out of this pupil? And that also comes with the quality feedback. Now, this just doesn't have to be the feedback that I put on work, especially at the moment where children and students are submitting work and we're putting feedback and we're sending them via email, and it's good to have them improve their work. But also I'm talking about feedback within, let's say, behavior. So in this class, I expect you to do this, this, or this. And then I'm giving them feedback and giving them confidence by going, wow, that's brilliant sitting on the floor, or what an amazing answer from you there. So I'm trying to get quality feedback, whether it be an actual long piece of written work that I'm giving feedback on, or just an action that the student's doing. As everyone knows, and we've had the opportunity to do this when we were actually at face-to-face time with the students, but developing a relationship and knowing the pupils well. During a class last year, I had a boy who had autism and wasn't accessing any of the materials really that we were doing. And when I found out, it was because the materials were to do with under the sea, sea animals. And he had no interest in sea animals. What he did have an interest in was Minecraft. So all I did was I Googled octopus Minecraft. And there was many pictures of octopuses on Minecraft and people who made octopuses on Minecraft. So I just developed the materials to suit his needs in relation to suit his needs and his interest. And from then on, he was really interested in the topic. He would complete the work, and it got him focused into the work. This comes to the inclusive learning environment, you knowing your pupils and what you can do in order to get them engaged. Then this leads to scaffolded learning, providing differentiated extra resources, focusing your planning, whether that be an individual healthcare plan, whether that be a plan that the students have set their own targets, or each of your lesson plans, putting that differentiation in, the extra resources in. Engagement and challenge links with that high expectation. There's no point of always assuming that your additional educational needs student needs the lowest material or the lowest challenge. Often students, especially students who've got autism, think very logically, and maths and science can be a subject that they are really strong in. So we need to look at the child as an individual. Effective questioning and modeling. And finally, this is the most important goal for me. And this comes with not just teaching additional educational needs students, but teaching all students, developing that independence, whether that comes to a child taking a test at the end of the course, the independence to be able to actually complete the test, whether that comes to a student with quite severe autism and you want them just to do a social interaction with someone, or you want them to be able to report back that they've gone to the shop and they've been able to buy something from the shop. Or whether that be a child with ADHD who you want to complete a project and they've been able to work in a group and actually complete the project. So the main goal, and this isn't just for students with additional educational needs, for me, the main goal with all teaching is to be able to develop independence within the student, whether that be one step of independence or whether that be with an 18-year-old who you're ready to send out into university. Maureen and Anne, has there been any other qualities or features that have become really prominent in the question and answer?
No, Daniel, but we've got a few of our attendees who are backing you up with empathetic. So it's all about starting and thinking about the students as your starting point for any of your planning and strategies that you're going to be putting in place in the classroom.
Yeah, so for me, whenever I find out I've got a student with a form of additional educational needs, it's empathy is the first 80% of actually helping them. I find out developing the relationship and knowing the pupils well, not just knowing their interests, but actually trying to be able to step in their shoes and understand what they're going through, whether that be they're suffering from ADHD and they don't have executive function, so they can't plan things, or whether that be they have on the autism spectrum and autistic spectrum, and they can't actually recognize emotions on people's faces. So 80% of it is actually understanding what they're going through, which creates empathy between you and the student, which actually for me motivates me to actually think of the resources that I'm going to actually create for them, etc. Anything else?
This is Anne here. I'm going to add, Sarah has added being observant, a good listener and observant, and maybe that's a big challenge now for us with online teaching. You know, that we have less opportunity to observe our students.
Yeah, I'm going to come later to a strategy that I use for observing right at the end of the presentation. But one of our biggest resources with teaching students with additional educational needs, and it's our biggest resource with all students, is communicating with the parents, because they have been with obviously their child, but been with their child in education for so long now that observing what the parents actually say and listening to what the parents say to find out what the student needs. There's a brilliant thing called a one-page profile, which we sometimes use at British Council, where students and their parents, depending on the age of the student, fill in this one-page profile which says what I'm good at, what I'm interested in, and what I sometimes find difficult, or what I need extra help in. So they fill in this, and then if they're moving between teachers, they can take it between teachers, or it's just something for them to reflect on, and for you as a teacher to observe what they actually struggle with and what they are actually strong at as well. Anything else, Anne and Maureen?
No, I think that's okay to move on.
Okay. So again, this is a really good, these are my 9 areas, but obviously there's much more areas that you've obviously mentioned in the question and answer, which make being a good additional educational needs teacher. But if I look at all these areas, and I look at the areas that you've talked about as well, they're not just specified for additional educational needs. These are just to be a high quality teacher, and to have high quality teaching going on in your classroom. You need to try and follow and have as many of these features and characteristics part of your actual teaching. Okay. Now, I really like this image, because for me, it means a lot for teaching children and students with additional educational needs. Often when we're creating resources and thinking about the class and what we're going to do, we often think about what all the children need. And then we start to think about what the additional educational needs child needs. So on this image, we have a janitor or a caretaker or a teacher clearing the path so the children can get inside. But as the child who's with additional educational needs, who's depicted in this picture as being in a wheelchair, says, if you clear the ramp, we can all go up. Now, this is very evident when we're talking about additional educational needs teaching, because often what we do for a child with additional educational needs will either benefit the rest of the class and have a good positive effect on the rest of the class, or will just have no effect on the rest of the class. So when I go through the strategies later, I want you to always think, would this benefit the other children, or would this just have no effect on the other children in the class? With here, it has no effect on them. They can go up the steps or they can go up the ramp. Either way is easier, but sometimes it's just better to think about the additional educational needs child first when we're talking about it, because they won't be always to be able to access what the other children can access or students can access. Okay, before I go into the strategies, I know that at the moment it's a very difficult time for the teachers and the students. We are in an unknown territory at the moment, because teaching online is brand new for myself, for yourself, and also for the students. This be whether you're teaching online using platforms like this, Zoom, using a platform where they complete different tasks online, or whether you're just using emails at the moment to communicate with your students. However, what we do still have is a responsibility to educate and progress all of our students at the moment, and try to provide the best education that we can, and to meet the needs of the students as much as we can during these very difficult times. And as I'm learning at the moment, using these different strategies, I'm sure you are at the moment as well. But the thing is, what we need to always remember is we need to try and involve these 4 pillars for me of high quality education. So if you've got these 4 things correct, normally everything else falls into place, okay? So I always ask myself about these 4 things when I'm completing a class. Now, this could be a class online, or it's still quite relevant if you're doing classes through emails as well. So the first thing for me is systems. Is it possible, is the first question, is it possible for me to try and continue with my systems that I'm already doing in my normal class? For example, can I still do some of my behavior management systems? can I still do some of my feedback systems? So giving students their marks and feedback on how they can improve. I've got to make sure that these are consistent across all of my children and all of my students. If it's not consistent, then I need to make sure that I make it fair for all my students still. Next one is routines. And in the next few slides, I'm going to go through a lot of routines that I'm using in the classroom and that I've used previously in the classroom and that I'm using when I'm teaching online at the moment. But for children who suffer from autism, who suffer from ADHD, routines is very important for them because often it can create extra anxiety for them if the start of the class or they start the class isn't the same or they don't understand what's coming next. Routines is vital for all children, not just children with additional educational needs. Next one is relationships. Fortunately, before we've all been sent online, we've been able to develop relationships and rapport with our children beforehand anyway. So we've already got that good solid relationships with our children. Again, this is knowing what their interests are, what they can handle, what they can't handle within class, etc. And the last thing for me is resources. Have I differentiated my resources? I provided a lower one with lots of support and some activities that are challenging. Have I given them resources to help them manage their anger or manage their social anxieties? For example, with children with autism, I'm not just thinking about providing them a timetable. I'm not just thinking about the resources that they need to be able to complete the task. I'm also thinking about giving them flashcards. So if they're starting to feel quite angry, they can show me, because they can't verbalize what they're actually feeling. They can show me on a flashcard that they're starting to feel quite angry before it happens. Then I can maybe take them to a breakout room, have a discussion with them, if that's possible. Okay. Now, the majority of the strategies that I've done in the past have all been face-to-face strategies. And a lot of them do depend on presence and rapport. But what I'm going to go through in the next few slides is talk about strategies that I'm using or I have used on the online classrooms at the moment. Because obviously at the moment, the part that we're missing is actually having that presence with the child. And that is a huge part. So I just wanted to remind you that any of these strategies that you take from this session, try and place them into your systems. Try and make them a routine maybe and see if they work. If they don't work, then you've tried at the end of the day. But give them maybe 2 weeks, a month before you decide, okay, this isn't working with my students. I need to try something different. It's all about trial and error when it comes to trying different strategies, because what fits one child with ADHD may or may not fit another child with ADHD, because they're so sometimes within one area of additional educational needs, there's such a spectrum. So we've always got to try different things with different students. Okay, first things for me is routines. It's really important to have a routine, especially with students with additional educational needs, ADHD and autism. The routines can be something as simple as getting a student to complete a register routine, because that's still possible within these online classrooms. Singing songs with young learners, especially earlier students. I know at the moment I'm still singing my hello song, my goodbye song, my what's the weather like today song that I'm still singing with my students. Songs that I'm not singing anymore is my circle time songs and my lining up for the class songs, because obviously that's not needed. Playing revision games with vocabulary, and that children have to look have looked at their self-assessment. So routines at the start of class, where I know back in England I used stuff like a purple polish pen, where they corrected their work from previous classes and responded to my feedback. This is not as possible at the moment with being online, but what is possible is giving them 5 minutes at the start of class, sending them back their work, and giving them 5 minutes to actually correct their work, and having you available there for them to ask questions if they don't understand. Having a behavior system in place is the one I'm using at the moment, student versus teacher or class versus teacher. I normally put mine just here so they can actually respond to it and see it. And I'll explain that behavior system very soon. And also completing self-reflections at the end of class. With early years, this could be something like finding something, okay, we've completed a song. Did you enjoy the song? Rather than just doing thumbs up and thumbs down, they're going to find something green or yellow or red to say whether they enjoyed it, thought it was okay, or didn't enjoy it. So just changing and using the environment around us. Okay, first of all, what I would like to make clear is within my routines, I always actually show what we're going to be doing in class. So this is a timetable that I used in England, but at the moment I'm using a timetable that I put on here for the students. So at the start of class, we talk about what we're going to be doing in class, just to prepare students, especially with ADHD, what order they're going to be doing some of the activities, whether that be a writing activity or a reading activity or a game, etc. So they know what's coming next. And I'll often refer back to it and go, okay, we completed that one, let's take it down. Or I'll leave it up and I'll say, we completed that one, what's next? And we'll look at what's going to be next.
Daniel, you're at
Yes?
30 minutes, just so you're at 30
Okay, thank you
minutes.
very much.
Okay.
Another system that I'm using at the moment is students versus teacher. Now, this is a really good one for students if you've got a child with additional educational needs. Because normally what it means is you may do students versus teacher. I'm going to count down from 10 and I want everyone staring at the class camera. I want everyone with their hands on their head. And by the time I get to 0, when I'm counting down, if the students are all doing that, they'll get a point. If they're not doing that, I'll get a point, but I'll never say, it was Jorge who wasn't doing that. I'll never say that. What I will say is, oh, one person or 2 people weren't doing it, I get a point. Also with the students though, you can make sure that you're giving really positive feedback. So let's say our child with dyslexia has attempted and answered 3 out of 5 of the questions correct. I can then go, wow, Maria's done such a good job on this activity. I think you all deserve a point because of what Maria's done. That gives Maria such a confidence boost, okay? So this is a behavior strategy where you can really boost the confidence of sometimes less able or lower attaining students in your class. Normally at the end of the day or the end of the week, if I've got more points, nothing will happen because I don't want to have that negative attitudes in class or that negative response in class. If the students have got more points, we may do a go noodle activity, which I'm going to show you at the end of near the end of this presentation, or we may do a game, or we may put a marble in a pot, and when the pot's full, then we get to have a little party, and it can be an online Zoom party if you want at the moment. So students versus teachers is a nice way to just have a nice behavior management strategy where you're trying to engage the whole class at the moment. Okay, another good thing that's especially good, sorry that it's a bit blurry, the image, but what I'm including in most of my presentations at the moment is preparation slides. So just before we start a task, even though I've got the timetable here, I will also show them that we're going to do a writing now, and students with ADHD or ADD suffer from a lack of executive function. So they understand they need to do a writing task, but they might not know what resources they need to be able to complete the writing task. So it's good to have, we're starting a writing task. In order to complete it, I will need a pencil and a notebook. So before we start, it's 5 seconds where the students go and get this. It either won't have, referring to that picture with the snow and the shoveling, it'll have no effect on the other students, or it actually will benefit the other students seeing this slide beforehand. It doesn't always need to be a pencil and a notebook. It can be, we're going to do a song now, so you need to have no chair and you need to have space. And you need to have your singing voice on. You can completely change the preparation slides however you want, but it's just that extra step before you start the task which can prepare the student, rather than just jumping straight in and say, I want you to write 3 sentences. A child with ADHD may not have their notebook in front of them, pencil, and they may not understand that they need that in order to do that task. Another good thing, especially students with dyslexia, that we can provide, especially if you're teaching through email at the moment, is word maths. Twinkle, which is I think free still at the moment to sign up for, has loads of different word maths that are around different themes. Also on there, you can create your own word maps where you can add your own images and add your own text. So you can make it fit the topic that you're doing. This is really good if you're going to do a writing. It doesn't have to just be nouns like on here. You can have an adjective word mat. You can have a linking word mat. You can have a sentence structure word mat where they can look at it. But what's really beneficial for students with dyslexia is having these images here next to them so they can be able to comprehend the actual meanings of the words. This, again, reverting back to that picture with the snow, you can either give this to all your students and it will probably have quite a positive effect on all your students, or you can give it to just the students with an additional educational needs, or the students who may struggle when it comes to actually the writing activity. You know your students better than anyone, so you'll know if they need this resource or they don't need it. But word mats are a really good thing that you can send out in an email before class, or you can have on the screen while they're completing the activities. I'll just go through this really quickly now. Simplified PowerPoints for students. This is with students with dyslexia. They struggle if there's lots of images all over the screen. So something like this may be beneficial for a student with dyslexia or may not. You know your students. So sometimes simplifying the PowerPoint can be beneficial for students. At the moment, even though we are teaching online and at the same time seen as quite detrimental and quite negative at the moment, there is a positive side that we have lots of reality and we have lots of things around us that we can actually bring into it. Sometimes we have more around us now than we did in the classroom. So we can use realia, especially teaching early years at the moment. I'm going, find something and bring me something, find the most colourful thing in your house. Or I'm asking some other students, bring back something that you found that you were bought on when you were on holiday, and we're going to talk about it in class, a little show and tell. These are something that we didn't really have available to us before, but now we have this more available to us now. But also making it relatable. I know I was teaching a child with autism recently, and I was using cartoons to try and show him about charity events. He could not understand anything about the charity events through the cartoons. But then I used an image of his school and a charity event that happened at his school. He was instantly able to recognize what it was. So making resources as relatable as possible. Confidence, we talked about in the previous slide, talking about student versus teacher. At the moment, student well-being is so important because students at the moment aren't able to get out of their house and their well-being may be the lowest that it's been in a long time. So making sure that we're giving students, especially with additional educational needs, more confidence and making them feel more comfortable in class and praising them and being positive towards them will actually bring out the best in their performance within class. Instructions. I used to do this when I was talking to the whole class, when I was actually in the schools. I used to always go, Maria, using example names, Maria, Rocío, Paula, class, and then I give my instructions so they could actually understand the instructions are for them. Sometimes children with additional educational needs don't understand when you're giving instruction to the whole class. It also refers to them. This is even more important now we're teaching online, that we've got to try and keep the students' attention all the time. So using students' name before you give the instructions is very important, because there's no point saying, have you written that, Maria? Because then she hasn't heard the instruction before. So we've got to use that beforehand. Also, a positive with teaching online is that we can actually put the instructions in the chat by typing the instructions, or we can give the instructions through an email beforehand. But for me, never give more than 2 or 3 instructions at a time. Always keep your fingers up and see if the children can actually recall what your instructions were. Okay, first thing, open your book. It may sound patronizing asking students to open their book, but it's very important to take it step by step. Open your book, get the pencil, complete activity 4, something like that, to keep it short. And thinking about, this is sometimes out of our control, but where our students are, because often students with autism can be hyposensitive. So if they have got, maybe like I have a window next to me, or I've got lots of objects around me, that can be quite daunting or there's a noise coming from outside, that can be quite, it can have a negative effect on the student's progress. Even me at the moment, I'm wearing a mustard jumper, and this can sometimes be too overbearing for a student. So we've always got to try and think about what the environment the students are in and what are PowerPoints. I've been very bad. I haven't used a blue background or for white text. This is really beneficial for students with dyslexia. It takes no time to change our PowerPoints to look like this, and I should have done it before, but it takes no time to change it to white text and a blue background. It'll have no effect on the other students, and it'll benefit the student with dyslexia, potentially. Okay. If possible, send a simplified PowerPoint to the student or the parent beforehand so they can become extra prepared before the actual class takes place. You can send a PowerPoint where you've took off all the answers, for example, so the student can work through the answers, or maybe they've got an open question where they have to give their opinion. They can start writing ideas about what their opinions might be before they're in class. Because when there's 30 other students in class, it can be quite distracting for a student with additional educational needs. So we don't need to add more pressure to them. Setting an alarm 15 minutes before class, speaking to the parents and asking, can you put an alarm on 15 minutes before class starts so the student can become extra prepared before they go in. And asking the parents to put links on desktops so they can just double click on it and they can either be straight into the class or they are at the sign-in page for the class. So links on desktops can sometimes be quite beneficial to just make that transition from going into the class easier for the student. One of the last things that I would like you to take away, and this is not just for students with, for example, ADHD, but having as much total physical response as possible. If you're doing true or false reading, when you're giving the answers, you might have true as standing up and false as sitting down. You might have, I'm going to read a question and I'm going to say a series of answers. And when we've got the right answer, I want you to stand up, put your hands on your shoulders, just trying to make it as interactive as possible. If you can't do that and you need to give your students a break because they're starting to get a bit antsy in their seat and moving around, Go Noodle is a brilliant website that's free to sign up with. And on there is 3-minute videos from little 3-minute yoga videos, 3-minute dance videos, 3-minute exercise videos, or for older teenagers, you've got 3-minute brain workout videos. So, for example, rubbing the belly, tapping the head, and lots of different versions of that. So Go Noodle is a really good website to just have that 3-5-minute break in your class just to get that energy out and bring the students back. Also at the moment, Joe Wick, who's a fitness instructor in England, is doing little PE classes for students for children from 3 years old to 18 years old. And the children can join in or not join in as much as they want. You can either put 5 minutes on this class or it's a 30-minute video. So if you want to get them to practice English while doing PE, Joe Wick is really good for that as well. And all the money he's raising is going to charity at the moment through it. So the last thing I'm going to just tell you about before we move on to any questions is this is a method that I'm using for recording any incidences or any situations regarding students or students with additional educational needs. So STAR, normally I create a table that one of the headers is setting, the next one's trigger, the next one's action, the next one's result. And I'll record each time something happens. So for example, the setting can be, it was in a maths lesson, it was in an English lesson, it was in a PE lesson, for example, or the child was in their bedroom, the child was in their living room. You choose what you think the setting was for that, for when an incident took place. The trigger might be that I had them working with a student that they didn't like, so they had maybe a meltdown at that point. The task was far too long, or I give too many instructions to the student. Could be any of those triggers that started them. You can find out the triggers from either talking to the student about what maybe caused them to not understand, or what maybe caused them to have, let's say, a meltdown. The actions, so what action did you do after it happened? If it was too many instructions, did you break it down for the student? If it was they start to get angry. Did you have a discussion with them? And then finally, what the result was. Did they calm down? Did they understand the task? Was it a positive result or was it a negative result? Did they end up having a meltdown after you spoke to them? So when I use this, the trigger section helps me understand what is essentially a negative thing for the student. What do I need to try and stay away from in my teaching? And the action section helps me understand what works for the student and what doesn't work for the student. So what do I need to do more of and what do I need to do less of? At the moment, we don't sometimes have our head teachers in there or our senior teachers to talk about when we record these incidences. So by just using the STAR strategy, it helps us when we do go to speak to the head teacher or when we do go to speak to the parents, we have a record of what's been happening and what's worked with the student and what hasn't worked with the student. And this is even beneficial for when we're passing a student on to a next teacher. We can then inform them what not to do with the student and what works with the student. Okay. Right, thank you very much for listening. In the question and answer section, if you type in any questions, or if Anne or Maureen have any questions that have come up that they would like to share with me, that's brilliant.
I don't think there's any questions. I mean, now people might be thinking about questions now, but thank you very much for such a clear presentation, Daniel. I really feel that you've helped us see, put the child at the centre of learning, both in the classroom and now that we're online, and given with the pillars of education some sort of something that we could all use to help us remember that, and many sort of strategies to help us with our students in class. If there's anybody else on the panel that just wants to comment or add any comments, Sonia or Maureen, while we're waiting for any questions. And if you've been listening, perhaps there's a question or a comment you would like to add. Sonia, would you like
so probably, first of all, a big thank you to Daniel. I think that one of the things that comes clearly over from his speech is that he is doing this every day in the classroom. And probably, I really would like to encourage people to start step by step and changing step by step things. So probably if we think about how to include children with additional needs of support in the online environment, it sounds just massive. But if we see Daniel's presentation and think like, oh, well, this is something I can do and this is something I can try, I think it's really encouraging. So many thanks for this, Daniel. And probably my only last reflection more in general is we have to do it because we are going to have almost 2 more months in this situation or even further. And it's just not fair for those children with additional needs to be excluded from the system. So whatever we can try to include them, it's just going to be helpful. So many thanks, Daniel, it says.
Thank you.
Just coming back on what Sonia said there, in the presentation I have put a lot of strategies there. Some I am using at the moment, some I am not using at the moment because it's not needed, or some that I've tried to use and it just hasn't worked. As Sonia said, take it step by step. Try one this day and one the next, because if you're going to implement them as systems and routines, it'd be pretty much impossible just to throw all of these strategies at once on the students and just seeing which one sticks. That won't work. So take it step by step, and hopefully, yeah, we do still have a duty to help these students. So hopefully some of these strategies you can take away, and I hope they do help you, because that's the main thing from this presentation, is actually to help the teachers and help the students that are related to those teachers.
Daniel, there's a question from Monica. I think her question refers to preschool. So just tips for teaching preschool level.
So with my early years, I'm just making sure at the moment I have as much TPR as possible. So even though as a teacher, and at the moment I'm living in a little in a studio flat, so there's only one room here with my girlfriend. But at the moment, when I've got my early years classing, I'm getting up, I'm dancing, I'm singing, I'm just making sure that there's as much physical response as possible. I'm getting them to go and quickly, I'll just say, flash something on the screen which says, go and get something blue. And they just have to go and get something blue and bring it back and present it and then take it back, just to get them moving as much as possible. So total physical response, I think, especially for preschool and early years, is really important. The routines and the songs. And what I'm finding beneficial, and I don't know if this is possible within your setting, is using phonics at the start as one of my routines, where we're practicing our sounds and we're practicing some words at the start. Just having that consistency of they come in, we do our songs about the hello, the weather, we talk about how are you, we practice some of our numbers, we go into phonics, then we have our main lesson where there's lots of physical movement, etc. And then at the end we reflect, whether it be through thumbs up, thumbs down, smiley faces, sad faces, going to find something that represents how they feel at the time, and just as much physical response and as much routine as possible is what I'm finding works well with all of my children, not just the ones who've got additional educational needs in that class.
Thank you. Maureen, would you like to talk about the next slide? Is there any more questions?
Just before we move on, Daniel, it's just a question that's occurred to me. Are you finding that you're also having to support parents through this time as well? Because a lot of what we do in schools and in our classrooms is working through parents and advising parents and offering support to parents. Just if you've found that the parents have been more demanding and needing more guidance from you for this period.
So with the early years at the moment, we are sending out, within British Council, we send out a weekly plan for activities that the parents can do with their students each week, which then relates to the actual classes that we're doing. But obviously a lot of parents are busy, so sometimes that's not possible because they've got their own work schedule. But I have had, yes, a lot of parents coming to speak to me before class and after class. And it is important to try and give them as much time to actually talk about, because we've been trained to be teachers and we are asking parents to do quite a bit within these times to make sure that the students are still progressing. So it is very important to have that communication with parents. And I haven't had to do this in any of my classes, but within some teachers that I'm supporting at the moment, sending out those PowerPoints beforehand to parents so they can talk through with their child about what's going to happen in class has actually been not just beneficial for the child, but beneficial for the parent to understand what's going on within their education.
Yep. Right. Thanks very much. Okay, then. If you move on to the last slide, Daniel, I'll just let everyone in the webinar know how they can keep in touch with British Council while we're in this quite unique period of the academic year. So what we've done, these webinars, Daniel's webinar and the other webinars we've done previously and the one on Thursday, are all part of our way of helping support teachers as we deal with this new learning environment. We have our newsletter, which we have an electronic bulletin every week you can sign up for, where we give you details of the latest British Council resources that are being enabled, whether it's webinars, whether it's MOOCs, online courses, or teaching resources that you can use in your own virtual classrooms. And that's a weekly bulletin. You can sign up for a bulletin on the British Council Spain website. Just go on to the section that says bulletins and choose Teaching for English. You can also follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on the British Council website we have a specific page which is Aprende en Casa, and there we've got resources where we put our resources for learners, for parents, and for teachers. Okay.
Thank you.
Maureen, and let me just add very briefly that on this web pages we are going to also kind of feed in what we are doing at the global level. So at the moment we're trying to make sure that any kind of resources which are identified at any of our kind of global network are compiled and put together. So it's a kind of huge effort from all across the globe, from staff members from the British Council, to ensure that anything in relation to additional needs is on one kind of available place. So we will make sure that we feed into this any kind of material, webinars, tips, and etc., so that you can kind of improve what you have in terms of resourcing for schools.
Okay, and just to add, the recordings of Daniel's webinar and the other webinars are available on the British Council Spain YouTube page, and we'll have the presentations available on our own British Council website, okay, which you can refer back to.
So we'd like to finish just by saying thank you again to Daniel. He's left us all with lots to do and to think about. And good luck with your class later this evening, Daniel, I know, or tomorrow. And from us, thank you for making the space in your afternoon and of course in your house. We all know how difficult it is to negotiate the space to attend a webinar. And we sincerely hope that you've taken something away from it, something to think about, something to actually do with your children. We look forward to seeing you in the next webinar, which in fact will be on Thursday. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for coming.